Hello, everyone. Welcome to our April discussion for the wounded workforce. We have an amazing panel pulled together for us today, and we are talking about something very timely, especially as we look to next month, which is Mental Health Month. So, we're talking about how we can create a culture of mental health at work. And as always, I am joined with an amazing experts to drive this conversation. And I will go ahead and I will kick it over to each of them to introduce themselves. I will say Sarah was unable to join us. We will certainly miss having her in the discussion, but look forward to including her voice in the future. I will go ahead and kick it over to Divya first to introduce yourself to the group.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie. This is an amazing panel. Super excited to be proud of part of it. I have been in healthcare for about 26 years in different capacities, mostly in commercialization and business development space. Um, One of the things I've noticed, and I've managed different teams at different times, but one of the things that has really become prominent is mental health in the last few years, especially since COVID. So I'm super excited to be here with this amazing panel talking about this topic. Thank you.
Amazing. We're so grateful to have you here. Velma, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here as well and talk about mental health today. I'm an executive and leadership coach and the founder of Work Bigger. And a lot of what I do is about behavior change. And, when we look at behavior change, mental and emotional health are a big part of that. So I'm really excited to dive in today and share a little bit of my perspective on mental health. So thank you for having me.
Amazing. Great to have you. Jen, go ahead and round us out.
I'm back. It's so good to be back, Stephanie. Thank you for having me. I'm Jen Fox. I've spent the last 25 years working inside and outside of organizations, listening to people, facilitating learning, and really leading cultural change. This topic is absolutely critical and has impacted me personally as well as professionally. So I'm really excited to dig into the conversation today and also to learn. The last panel we did, I had more notes going than anything. So I've got my notebook ready to go.
Amazing. I know I always am like, oh, I always have so many notes, so many takeaways, so many more books to read and podcasts to listen to. It's amazing. And then, of course, I always forget to introduce myself. So I should probably do that. So I'm Stephanie Lemek. I'm the founder and CEO of the Wounded Workforce, an organization dedicated to building trauma-informed workplaces. Prior to starting the Wounded Workforce, I spent over 16 years in house in a variety of HR roles. Certainly have seen how mental health shows up at work. So, super excited for this conversation. As we always do, we are going to start with a little overview of today's topic. I love to start from a place of shared understanding. So, want to provide an overview of what we'll be discussing today. So first and foremost, when we talk about creating a culture of mental health at work, let's remember that we all have mental health. And our mental health absolutely impacts our workplaces, both for the good and the bad. Mental health at work is a critical aspect of overall well being and health in the workplace and impacts how each of us and each of our colleagues show up at work. Our mental health impacts how we feel, think, and act at work and how organizations and teams that prioritize mental health can see and realize significant benefits. So, today we are going to chat all about mental health, creating that culture in the workplace, and what that can look like for each of us. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, follow me on social media, one of my big hot buttons is we all have mental health. So when we talk about mental health at work and creating a culture of mental health, we're really talking about something that's inclusive of everyone. It's not just specifically talking about people who have maybe having mental health challenges or perhaps experiencing mental illness. So would love to kick it off for each of our panelists. I'd love to hear from you. Why is this topic important to you, either personally or professionally or both? And go ahead and jump in, whoever would like to start.
Sure, I can go first. Why not?
Perfect. I love it.
So for me, I think mental health is extremely important because I feel, when I'm in that good headspace, I am so much more productive. I'm such a great person to be around. Every time I say, oh wow, you're like such a pleasure. And then I also feel that I am being more impactful. And when I am not in that particular nice headspace, everything goes down. I don't want to talk. I don't want to do stuff. And one of the things I've noticed in all these years, it's this exact same principle that works with the teams as well. When your team is in that flow, in that really good mental space, the headspace, they are performing, they're outperforming, they're beating targets, like they're making you look so good. All you have to do is make sure that they are taken care of and they understand what the need is and you're listening to what they're looking for, right? So just by doing that little piece, I think we make better leaders. And I've seen this time and time again. The leaders I look up to have always taken the time to say, how are you feeling? How are things going on with you personally? Is everything okay? And do you have everything you need? It's like those basic questions that really set the trajectory for success. So it's not just me personally, but the teams as well. So both professional and personal, I've realized how important this topic is. And I'll be very honest, I wasn't this way when I started my career. With age and expertise comes wisdom, I guess, with time. And this is something I've learned over time, but has really been underscored for me in the last 3 years, I would say. So, absolutely important in every way, both personally and professionally for me.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in next. Thank you, Divya, for sharing that. I resonate so much with what you shared. I think for me personally, mental health started becoming really important when I experienced burnout a few times in my professional career, and mental health really, it wasn't a big priority. I remember graduating college, being super ambitious, wanting to climb the corporate ladder and do all the things. And eventually I ended up burning out. And it was when I started digging into mental and emotional well-being that I started to really understand what actually drives success and joy. It's not just about what we're doing and the behavior and the action. So for me personally, I think it's such a foundational aspect to every single thing that we do. I don't think we can be successful in any part of our lives unless we're attuned to our own mental health. So, yeah, I would say it definitely comes from having experienced struggles around it and create, just having a passion for wanting to work on it personally. And then as I became an executive and leadership coach, and learn more about behavior change and psychology and neuroscience, I really started to see that if I, to support clients in the most sustainable way possible, you have to dig deep. It's not just about the strategies and again, like what we're doing. It's really about understanding what drives that. So that's where my passion, for mental health comes from, and personal connection too.
I really love that word sustainable. I want to come back to that too, because I do think that that's really one of the keys when you think about organizational focus on this topic. When I've been on a few different conversations around this and, why is mental health important? And I like to say, if I were like MLK and I have a dream speech, it would be something like, I have a dream that like at one point soon in the future, we won't call it mental health. It will just be health, because I'm a big believer in a mind-body connection. I have experienced myself, like we're just one person. And so I think the positive shift I've seen in the workplace over the last couple of years is now we're naming it mental health and we're focused on it. I mean, we're here today. And yet my concern sometimes is that the more we carve it out as something separate, the more it's like out there and over there, and it takes away from like all of the other stuff. And I just think, so often our mental health, it impacts our physical health, and it's sometimes hard to separate those two things. So I don't know, hopefully one day that'll happen. Have me back on your panel, Stephanie, when that becomes the norm, and we'll talk about it.
I love it. I knew this was going to be a great discussion. I want to call out to you, Velma, something you said about experiencing burnout. Burnout probably is one of the hottest terms out there in the last couple of years as it relates to the workplace, employees, engagement. And what I think is so interesting is that burnout is like the kind of terrible end result, the thing we want to avoid happening. And so often we're fixating on burnout, preventing burnout, recovering from burnout. And I love the shifting conversation to mental health or health. I'm on board, Jen. I love it. It really is more about being proactive and how we can care for our mental health holistically, our whole person, and not get to that place of burnout, of compassion fatigue, of even secondary trauma or traumatic experiences. So I love thinking about that in that way, because I think a lot of times people will get focused on employee engagement or burnout, and they're missing that key piece of what are we doing to support overall health or mental health of our team.
Well,
Love
and I wonder too, I think that because in one sense, because now this has started to, there's been so much focus on it. I feel like burnout now is like a throwaway, you ask someone, that you run into at coffee, how are you? Oh, I'm so burnt out. Everybody's burnt out. And so I feel like the term itself has now been watered down to the point that I think that it would be too easy to diminish someone's experience who's actually experiencing. I mean, burnout is a thing, right? But I worry because so many people now are using it, and I think it's kind of watered it down. And I worry that that'll have us have a less urgency around the people who actually are like in an acute phase. Bauman, I wanted to, thank you for sharing that. I think, a lot of us probably have those stories about when we were there. It just seems like now it's like, oh, everybody's burnt out. What's the big deal?
So Jen, you bring a really good point. I met somebody's grandkid, I think six, that's all, a coffee shop, 6 years old. I'm like, how's life? How's school? Like, I am burnt out. You're
Yeah.
so right. Like, I'm like 6 year old. You haven't even seen anything in your life. How are you burnt out? But you're so right. Like, it kind of minimizes for the people who are actually burnt out, because now nobody's listening. You're the 12th person who said this to me. How many people am I going to pay attention to? So sometimes they kind of, it's an injustice to them by calling something that's not to that same magnitude a burnout. But yeah.
such a great point. I think it's two things in my mind come up when we start to use a word like burnout. Like trauma even is a word that I see this happen with, especially, the younger generations, especially on social media. When we overuse a word, when we use a term colloquially, I think again that can, water down its meaning, can water down people's experiences of it. But I think the other aspect that leads to, a disregard for a term is people not understanding what it really is and what they can do about it. Kind of that sense of helplessness. Well, everyone tells me they're burnout. I have no idea what to do about it. So it's just the thing that everyone's saying. And I think we see that come up so frequently. It's a really interesting point. I'm intrigued by this. But to lend to some action when we think about that, when we think about, how do we support folks proactively instead of reactively when we get to a place of burnout. What are, some key elements that you think should be priorities in a workplace culture that is focused on promoting mental health?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. I really love what Jen shared around body-mind connection. I thought of the word integration when you said that, Jen, like really considering like the whole person, right? Not just like aspects of us. And I think from an organizational perspective, I've seen some companies tackle well-being really beautifully and tackle burnout, right, or employee burnout. And then I've seen other companies that are really struggling with it. I think there's been more focus on things like mental health and well-being, and I think when it's done right, there's an educational component. We're not just focusing on benefits, for example, like here's a $200 gift card to get a massage. I think things like that are really wonderful and helpful, but I think the companies that are doing it right have a willingness to go deeper, to educate themselves as leaders and their employees about what things like mental health really mean, right? And to really understand things like emotion regulation and body-mind connection and mindfulness. And they're really willing to go a bit deeper rather than just on the surface level. I think if companies can support employees in that way, it just will have such a huge impact and will be, going back to sustainable. I think it'll be much more sustainable for the long term.
So actually, great point, Belma. One thing I would add is we all have companies who kind of try to put together the right benefit package. They have their own constraints, right? Monetary, whatever else. I think even as leaders, some things, simple things that we can do, right? When you walk into a room and you see there are like 5 people in the room, all you have to ask is what stresses you out, right? Today, this is what you're working on. When they're giving you even basic, updates on what's happening for them for that week, you're like, okay, is there any stress point here? Is there anything that will stress you out or is keeping you up? How can we help as a collective team, or how can I find you the right resources that can eliminate that part? That in itself, I think, like, small steps in every area, grassroots. We can say, okay, this is what you need for this week. And sometimes it's as simple as, this week is my daughter's week away, so I can do more, versus next week I have to go on a field trip with her, and I know my deadline is here. I'm really stressed out about that. And that can be as simple as, what, I'll have somebody else shadow you, so for whatever reason it doesn't get done, they can take over from that time, but the time away that you have planned should not get impacted. It's simple little things that we can do at every level. Again, I always feel we can lead from every level. You don't have to have a title, you don't have to have a team. We all have it within us. How can we make those small steps so it's not all depending on what that package is from HR coming? How can we really make that for each of our teams and employees?
Yeah, I think that's the crux of the issue, talking about mental health at the level of the organization when mental health is an individual phenomenon. And so, and I've been the program manager and the owner of, employee wellness. And you have to, that construct forces you to look for the like one size fits all-ish approach, because there's no other way to do it when you're at least working in a company of any type of scale. And so, and I think then what a lot of companies do, it's like, okay, we don't want to have a one size fits all. Okay, well then let's do some individual, Bama, you say like there's the stipend or the individual thing. Or then they say, well, let's put it up to the managers. The managers will be responsible for like making sure everybody's okay. Guess what? Yes, they're the most burnt out audience in corporate America, right? That middle manager. So when I think about what do organizations need to do, if you follow any of like the stuff I share on LinkedIn, I am hell-bent on advocating for flexibility and future of work practices, because not only not what works for me is different than what works for each of you, but what worked for me a year ago is different from works for me right now. It's situational, it's evolving, it's ever changing constantly. And so I don't think there is an organizational program, policy, anything that could ever meet my needs. Sometimes I think, am I just one of those people that cannot be satisfied? It's like, so when I think about mental health, when am I at my best? It's when my work feels meaningful. It's when my environment is aligned with my core values. It's when I can show up as myself, whatever that looks like, and I can advocate for myself. There's so many components to that. It might be time off today to go to your daughter's field trip. It might be the flexibility to work till 10 o'clock at night, because that's when I get into my zone. So I think it's just really hard, and it's complex, because that's why I love these conversations, because there's just no answer. If there was an answer, we would all be doing it by now. But I think the main thing that I would center is taking that individual approach, that it has to be up to the individual. And there's two sides to that. There's the organization supporting the individual, and then there's the individual. It is up to us ultimately to show up and advocate and speak up and say what it is that we need as well. And that can feel really scary. But yeah, this organizational, like what do companies need to do? It's like, I don't even know how unless you have a company of one, which I am, and I'm still a disaster figuring it out. So I don't know how you figure out what the solution is for like a company of 1,000 people. It's impossible.
I think
Yeah.
that's such a great point. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's okay. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Please go on, Bella. Go ahead.
Well, just to, yeah, I love what Jen shared. It makes me think like the way the company can support, right, is by upholding its values and making things like well-being and mental health part of its values, right, and part of what it stands for, and it can support employees in that way. And then I also love the focus on the individual and the individual having agency over their well-being and really knowing themselves. And then with what Divya shared, I love this, like these like simple actions that leaders can take. That also makes me think of, if an organization is really grounded in its values and it's living those values and it has this willingness to just check in on the individual, right? Or like have that conversation with how are you doing? What are you needing? I think that also goes a long way, because what I heard from your share, Divya, is that if, as an individual, if you're receiving that kind of attunement or support or check-in, right, or just the willingness to have the conversation, that is pretty significant too.
I think it's so important too. I love where we've landed because I think there's some really interesting points here. I think a lot of mental health, a lot of health in general, is kind of pushed to here's the benefits package. HR, go on your marketing campaign, a couple of times a year to offer this smorgasbord. There are a lot of amazing benefits that are being offered. I think oftentimes they are underutilized or they're really specific, not meeting someone's need. And a lot of times, what people are saying is creating the most stress or has the greatest impact on their mental health when they think about the workplace. Access to benefits is great, but it's actually the day to day. It's their workload. It's what the culture is like. It is their relationship with their mania. So I love what you said, Divya, about what are you doing as a leader? And you can lead from anywhere. I might have to borrow that quote. That's perfect. How can you actually move that forward? I think it's so important. There's some statistic I'm going to butcher, and I'll just be really generic with it. There's a statistic came out that managers have a greater impact on an individual's mental health than their spouse. Like, holy bananas. That is so significant. And like Jen mentioned, managers have been put in a really, I honestly think, terrible position over the course of the last few years in terms of so much stress, so many differing, changing expectations, and very few resources or tools to help support them doing that. And one of the things I've heard when I'm talking to folks is people want to talk to me about their mental health now. So I'll be having a conversation and a one-on-one with my employee, and I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle this. I'm not equipped. And I think that level of, awareness is great. But what can organizations do to better support those leaders in those moments? And, what can leaders, managers, people leading from anywhere in an organization do themselves to feel, better prepared to support their teams, their peers' mental health in the workplace and their own mental health too. Let's be honest.
Well, I think actually, since I would offer two ideas here. One is, and maybe since the last time we met, I became mental health first aid certified, and I will say, like, I don't know, every person should, whether you're a parent or a teacher or a supportive professional, whatever. Certainly, managers in the workplace. It was such a profound, one day investment for me to find the vocabulary. A lot of it is just that, right? Like you just said it. You don't know what to say. And I think, most of us, I'm, because they're putting all of us in a bucket here, at least of our generation, we weren't raised to like talk about our feelings, especially not as women in the workplace. So we don't have access to that vocabulary. So I would say, first of all, I would bring that into every organization as one thing. And then on a more practical level, I would say, I think one of the most powerful things that a manager can do without having to take on the responsibility is just to understand their people enough to know sort of where that each direct report sort of set point is. And I'll give you an example. With the last team I managed, we used a tool where they would, before a one-on-one, you'd rate yourself, like sort of a check-in, like, how do I feel on my well-being, on my learning, on my productivity, whatever. And so coming into that one-on-one, I could look and see on the slider, it's not about if they're like a 7 or a 4, but if they're usually a 7 and today they're a 4, then I really need to scrap whatever agenda we wanted to talk about and focus on that question and say, like, what's going on? And so I think it's really important that you know enough about your people to the extent that they want to share with you. I'll add that in, because I think this big focus on vulnerability and how are you, we make the assumption that everybody's willing to just share it all, and they're not. And there's some really significant like cultural aspects to that we have to take into account. But I think it's just so important to know where that set point is and then be willing to just listen. I had a team member who said that I recognized that she had depression before her spouse did, because I could see that change happening. That's not saying that I did anything heroic, but so that's where I would say is like, forget the programs and the benefits, just get to know your people so that you know enough to know when something's off. You don't have to solve it when something's off, but you know enough to be able to be there and identify it. And then if you understand whether it's mental health first aid or whatever it is, then you can start to connect them with the resources to help them be their best self. So I'm curious to hear from you all.
So you brought a great point, Jen, and I'll maybe add to it. One of the things I always thought was, you always have to have the silver bullet, right? Answer to everything, especially with mental health or even just stress related conversations. It was a little bit awkward because culturally, again, I wasn't encouraged to talk about feelings ever, right? You do stuff, you get it done. You don't talk about how you feel. That was something new. One of the things, and this came about because my daughter the other day, she was saying something, I'm stressed out, and then I'm like, oh, what can we do? How can we solve this? This was, I think, when she was in high school 4 or 5 years ago. And she goes, you don't need to solve everything. All I'm looking for is a year to listen. All I need from you is just listen. I will solve my own problems. It's personal. All I need you is to just listen. And I'm like, but then if I'm not helping you, she goes, that's the help I need. I just need to vent. I just need somebody to listen. I don't want them to solve my problems. I'll do it myself. And that kind of, got me into my aha bulb. I'm like, okay, am I trying to solve for everybody? Am I just supposed to just listen, just be there, be supportive, be that ear they're just looking for because they can't talk to anybody else and they've trusted you with that? All you need to do is just be there. And I've exercised that over the years and it has done wonders for me and for them, because now I am not stressing out. Oh my God, I don't know a solution. How am I going to solve for it? That's not my problem. And sometimes for them also, this undue burden of my solution sitting when they really didn't need it is also out. So that also helps. Just listen. Sometimes just being a good listener. And we're never taught that in any of the leadership trainings, or even when mentor mentee. I'm big on mentorship, so I have a lot of mentees. I have had a lot of mentors. Nobody ever said, listen. Nowadays it comes up quite a bit. Be a good listener, be an active listener. But again, active listening half the time tells you, ask the question again so they know you're listening. Sometimes even that in this new workplace is not something people are looking for. They just want to understand that you're there to listen. And if they need really help and they're asking for help, they'll come back. But you have this, context because you have been part of that conversation for a while. They don't have to do a dump on that day. But they don't expect anything. Just listen. So that has really helped. I don't know your experiences, Palma.
Oh my gosh.
Stephanie.
Yeah, Divya, you're like speaking my language. I couldn't agree more. I co-founded a company called Proactive Conversations, and a big part of what we teach is active listening, but it's really about being present with another person. And I think I love having the language to support them around emotions. Yes, I think is so powerful. And also just being able to hold space, meaning like you're just able to give them this space to share. And oftentimes that's all they need. I love the example with your daughter. I think we often just have like such an urge to fix with our kids, right? And of course that shows up with friends and in the workplace. I couldn't agree more. I think to be able to do that, I think it is challenging to listen. We have such a need to fix, right? And I think often that comes from a place of empathy, or it's difficult to watch someone else struggle, right? And in that moment, just if you are a manager and somebody's coming to you and they're sharing a struggle, just to remind yourself, like, I don't need to take this on, like, this is theirs, but I can just to be there for them right now. Holding space is significant. And you can also check in with them, right? Asking, like, how can I support you here? If they need that if they need advice or more guidance, or they need help in fixing it, they'll let you know. So yeah, I love that you shared that. I couldn't agree more.
This is so good. And like two major thoughts came up for me. The first one is, maybe this is a personal problem, or maybe it is my instinct, how, many of us are socialized as women. We're socialized to help and to jump in and to help and fix things. And I had like this moment the other day. I was going through the customs line, and a family was like stressing out because they might miss their next flight. And I was like, how can I help them? And I'm like, I was starting to get anxious, and oh my gosh, I need to jump in. I'm like, I can literally do nothing, and this isn't my problem. Like, why am I like so like geared in to see someone is in, stress, and think I have to, be part of a solution? And me being stressed for them didn't help anyone. And I think that comes up so frequently when we look to help. It's because we feel responsible for some reason. So I'm, trying to work on, hey, is this about really them wanting help, or is this about me feeling as though I need to spring into action for some reason? And I think,
Can I say something about that, Stephanie, before you move on?
yes, of course.
Okay, here's what, because I think you're touching on something, and it goes back to Belma's sustainable. When we do that, also I'm that. I was at a theater the other night with my daughter, and someone on the other side of the theater, like, I think had a seizure. I don't even know, because like they're on the other side of the theater, and I feel like for some reason I should be calling 911. And I'm like, why would I do that? I know nothing about what's going on over there. But I so resonate with, I would have been that person in customs. So I see you. It's not a personal problem. I'm validating you. And I think as an organization, when we do that, and I could countless examples. We had an employee take their life. Let's just take a really, really the most terrible example that happens in the workplace. And what happens? We spin up a program, a support group, education, and everybody's like all well-intentioned. Everybody's well-intentioned to like come in and fix the need, right? Because it's like right there, but with no eye to the long term. It's like the news cycle, right? So it comes, and then it's like immersive, and then it fades because there was no effort to make it sustainable. That's why that word was just so perfect when you said that to me. And I think it's critical for organizations to think about this. And there's going to be a lot of times, I think companies who establish their core values, their social responsibility agenda, is so hard, but they have to do that proactive work of saying, what are the issues that we're going to weigh in on, and what are those that we're not, so that when insert, current event, ad nauseum happens, they don't feel that need to jump in and be that savior or have the political statement or whatever, if they're not educated or willing to do the work that's behind it. And then if you are, you better be damn sure that you're going to like put your money where your mouth is if you say this is something that we care about. But I just wanted to touch on that, because I think you and customs feeling that need is exactly what organizations do when some type of lowercase or uppercase trauma happens, and they jump to solutions too quickly.
Yeah.
So there's a term for that, actually. It's called empathic distress versus empathic care, right? So when we're experiencing empathic distress, we're taking on that responsibility when it's not ours to take, versus empathic care, right? We feel more compassion and empathy, and actually empathic care drives us towards action that's more effective, whereas empathic distress leads to more reactive behavior, which sounds like that's what you're hitting on, Jen, from like what organizations are doing.
Great. Thank you. You're building my language right now. So
Thank you. I was
got
taking
notes going again.
I'm like, this is superb. I love that.
I think too, like Jen, you hit on something so important, and it's something that's like a hot topic. Organizations weighing in on world events, social issues, all sorts of things. And it becomes, it's really with anything organizations, leaders want to speak on, want to take action on. It's understanding and pulling back to your values and what you're committed to. Otherwise, it all kind of becomes lip service. It all kind of starts to feel not genuine, check the box, performative. Pick your, not so lovely description of choice. And I think it's something we're really kind of reckoning with in a pretty public way, and it really challenging for most organizations, most leadership teams who, like you said, haven't done that proactive work already.
If you look at job descriptions now, everybody has in their employer brand, mental health programs, mental health stipend. I think it comes back to this, right? And you're like, okay, you scratch the surface. Is a subscription to Headspace the extent of like that's great. I love it.
Yes.
And so it's like if you're doing it to check the box to say, oh yeah, we have mental health stuff, so we can attract the candidate that wants to come and work for a progressive company. But if that's all there is, but then, oh, P.S., you need to like commute 5 days a week and there's no flexibility and we monitor all the things, which one's going to have more of an impact on my mental health? So it's like, I would rather people like, don't say you have mental health programs or that this is an important part of your like employer brand unless you actually do. Because I think especially the younger generation now, Gen Z, they are savvy. They absolutely understand mental health and they place a huge priority on it compared to certainly what my generation did. And they're going to call BS on it. They're going to be like, tell me about your mental health programs. And if it's a Headspace app, again, no shame, love Headspace, but it can't just be an app for $10 a month.
100%. I also want to go back to one other thing I thought was really important that Divya, you highlighted perfectly. When we go back to, are you listening, to listen, to be supportive? Are you listening again to take action? I like that empathetic distress, but I'm immediately obsessed with that term. Something that was really helpful and important for me in, my development and my career is understanding the difference between advice and coaching. And I think that is something, there is a subtle difference, but it's a huge difference. And it's a really big deal. When we think about advice, which we often ask people for advice, we might ask a mentor for advice. What would you do in this situation? Or what should I do? You're getting that, like, give me your advice trigger. Say, hey, I would do X, Y, and Z. When you get asked to coach, especially a leader or manager gets asked to coach without the tools and understanding of what that really means, more likely than not, they're just going to give advice. I mean, I've done that so many times before I had a better understanding, training, resources on how to coach. You're going to give advice. And the thing with advice versus coaching versus listening is when you give advice, you're telling someone what you think they should do. And it's very easy for that person to hear that and then also hear judgment. And when we're talking about mental health, when we're talking about creating psychological safety, advice can work against that when it's not welcome. So that's one thing I think that's really key. If you're a manager and you don't know where to start in terms of how do I have better conversations? How do I get to know my team better one-on-one? I think starting to build those coaching skills and trying to catch yourself giving advice, it's tough. I mean, I still work on it. It's tough, but I think driving that awareness around that can be really meaningful.
That's a great point. And so, one place where I see this done excellently, I don't know how we can take that and do this on a bigger scale. Um, I run. So, when I have a guided run, they coach you while you're running. They're not advising you because they always say, put in a 7 out of 10 effort. They're not telling you run at this speed because everybody's speed is different. And I think that's the attitude we need to bring to these kind of conversations. What's your 10 is up to you, but then at this point you should be running at a 7 versus this is an easy run, you should be at a 4. And that really helped me. So I love those guided runs, not because I need the guidance all the time. I just love to hear the voice, and I just love to hear do your 6 out of 10. And I'm like, okay, you know what? My 6 out of 10 has improved from my last year's 6. That gives me some pleasure, whatever you want to call it. But it makes me happy. But now just listening to you talk about this, that's the kind of coaching we need to have in mental health space. I don't know how to do this. I don't think we're there yet. But if we can get that in here, I think that's something to look for.
I love that. I love that example because it's such a, I mean, who hasn't done a, kind of coached whatever, whether it's meditation, run,
Yeah.
bless you for running. I don't run, but like, you know what I mean? Like a yoga class, a Pilates class, just that style, that approach. I think that that's such a great way to kind of consider it and shape it to, your own style and how you may coach or talk with your team members. That's really thoughtful example. I love that. To switch gears a little bit, I want to throw out maybe a tricky question. We'll see. You guys are doing really well, so probably you'll have wonderful answers. But mental health often intersects pretty significantly with other factors around who we are as individual, kind of our lived experience. So how can organizations address the intersectionality of mental health when we think about factors like race, gender, socioeconomic status, etc. What ways can organizations consider that as they look to build that culture that supports mental health overall?
Yeah. So what comes to mind for me is kind of what Jen was sharing before, like really getting clear on what you want to support and what you want to address as an organization. And I also think it's really important to listen to the individual. I think we hit this on earlier, right? There's like no one size fits all. We all have different backgrounds and different experiences and different traumas, right? And I think it's it has to be that's like very individual, I think. And also just bringing in some of the other stuff that's already been said, that's where the listening is really important. Being willing to listen, right? And hear what other people's experiences are like, I think is really important with understanding what that support looks like when you talk about intersectionality.
I have an easy solution for this. So if you're in an office or you're on a Zoom, whatever, here's what you do. Put a huge sign in the lobby and on the bathroom mirrors and on everybody's screensaver. And it says, just because it's not a problem for you doesn't mean it's not a problem for someone else. That's it. And reread it 97,000 times a day. Because again, it comes back to the individual thing, but so often in the organizations, unfortunately, the patriarchal environment that we're in corporate America is still largely being dictated by one demographic. And right now, even if the most best organizations who want to do all the things, at the end of the day, the decision makers are coming back and they're making it, they can't help it. They're coming from their own lived experience and they can't understand. So get diverse when you're creating new policies and programs and all the things, invite the different perspectives to the table. And I'm not just talking about invite, the woman of color and the one Gen Z and no, like all the people, and I think that, I speak so passionately about my experience as a caregiver, and as a parent. I think all of us here can agree. They're like our best teachers, no matter what. All lessons come through these beings. And it's shocking to me how even corporations run by men who have children still don't understand what it means to be the mother, of the children. And so I just think that I must write that phrase, just because it's not a problem for you doesn't mean it's not a problem for someone else. I mean, in the comments on LinkedIn, it's probably at least a dozen times a week, because I just keep coming back to it. And I think it's that simple reminder for us. And I need to do that work myself as well, right? When I don't understand with something, and that it applies to anything, even to my kids. Why is this so difficult? Why is it so hard to get out the door at 8:00 in the morning? Well, just because it's not a problem for me doesn't mean it's not a problem for them. So I don't mean it to sound like trivial or trite, but I do think here we often jump into the solutions. And I do think it has to be the mindset, because I do think if we have the right mindset, and we invite the diverse perspectives to the table, we will do right by people. I inherently believe that we do, but it has to start with the right mindset.
Great points, both Belma and Jen. One other thing I would also add is a lot of companies now have ERGs, like the employee resource groups, which are like either a certain race or a certain background, culturally, age group. I think it's so important for us to bring all of those ERG perspectives on the table. To Jen's point, maybe the age group has some issues that culturally another ERG does not see a point with, but if by bringing all of them to the same discussion table, I think HR can really understand what are the key things that they want to invest in. Again, they can't do everything for everybody. They just have to prioritize, but it might help them to prioritize which initiatives they're going to put more effort in versus if it's a problem for, I always grew up with this exceptions don't make the rule. If it's just one very vocal small group that's raising the voice because they're very vocal, they have more time than others, does not make it a bigger problem. We have to be very rational on what's a real problem versus what's being the squeaky wheel should not get oil all the time just because you're squeaky. Squeak all you want. We need to oil the wheel. That's the most important. The one that has the brake on it needs to stop when you need to. So I think we need to have that mindset and get involved and bring all those different teams that are there by structure to the discussion table to really understand.
I'm glad you brought up ERGs, and I'll just jump in for a second on that. In my last role, I was the executive sponsor of a new ERG that we co-founded, which was around mental health, neurodivergence, and disability. And so when we're talking about, I think it fits really well here because it's true intersectionality. I would say everyone that belonged to that ERG was also a member of our LGBTQ, all the other, the parenting, whatever. But that one brought people together. And I remember, I will never forget the first meeting that we had where, we probably had 30 some people in the room, and then it was, similar number online. And it was just like tears because people were saying, I can't believe that I'm here and I can show up as myself through this lens for the first time. Maybe they had been showing up as whatever other identity that they had in the workplace, but all of a sudden they could come and say, I struggle with anxiety, or like, I don't learn in this environment, and these like fluorescent lights are like literally causing migraines all day. So the intersectionality there. And I would say that I think that if people listening are responsible for, wellness programs or whatever, I would really consider forming an ERG to, at your organization around what, maybe it's well-being, maybe it's specifically around mental health, but something that can bring in that dimension because it right away addresses that intersectionality. It's like all are welcome. It's a level playing field. And I do think that there are still a lot of barriers. There's a lot of cultural barriers, to that. And we really struggled with that, is really making sure that people knew like all are welcome here. But yeah, it was just a profound experience. And I think that the best organizations are going to start to do that, give people a formal place to gather and talk about these issues.
I love that we're talking about too, listening and having these multiple voices, because I think something that I've stopped hearing as much when we've had, all of this discourse around diversity in the workplace and other places, intersectionality, is people talk about needing to have it and the requirement, or should it exist, all of these things. And we're stopped talking about one of the most amazing parts. And that is when we invite all these different and unique voices, we get to something much greater. And we come to a better environment for everyone. And I mean, I keep saying this specific around generational opportunity. People are talking a lot about Gen Z, myself included, coming into the workplace. And shifting that, oh crap, how do we deal with Gen Z that you did to millennials? As a millennial, I'm still emotionally scarred from it. But shifting that to look at this opportunity we have to have, folks with decades of experience, and then individuals who are, digital natives, and everyone in between in the workplace at the same time. What an amazing opportunity. And I think refocusing and shifting back to when we invite all of these voices in, look at the opportunity we have. And sure, we won't always get it right, but we can listen and really do more and build more from there. This is such a good conversation. And once again, the hour flew by in record time. I want to make sure we have a few minutes left for my favorite question that I always like to wrap up with. For each of you, I'd love to hear if folks are interested in learning more about, anything you brought up, your work, or anything you would recommend as it relates to mental health in general or mental health at work. I'd love for you each to share some recommendations with our listeners, and go ahead and jump in whenever you're ready.
Okay, I can go first. So there are a lot of books, there are new podcasts coming every day. I don't have one specific recommendation because again, things work for different people. One of the things that has really helped me lately is I'm not a big yogi. I'm not good at yoga. I suck at it. I'm usually the last person in the corner in the room, so nobody can see me do any of my poses. But one thing, and I was not a meditation person either. But one thing I found this app, which is like 3 minutes of meditation and 5 minutes of yoga. It's literally 5 minutes. So it's like 8 minutes in a day you can always find. I have very early mornings, but even in that, I can find 5 to 8 minutes in the morning, or you can even split 3 minutes of meditation and 5 minutes of yoga in the evening. I end up doing that as well, which is funny. But that has really helped me because it gives me a routine, and then it also makes me force myself to just be quiet, just think. And I'll be very honest, I've started doing that maybe 2 months ago. My mind still wanders around. It's not as quiet as it's supposed to be, but I feel great after that. So I think for me, that has helped quite a lot. It's 8 minutes a day investment I could easily do with a very simple app, so I don't have to go someplace or depend on somebody. It's just all me by myself, but that really helps.
Do you know the name of the app by chance?
It's called the Yoga Go, I think.
All right. That's awesome. But it's so important. 8 minutes. Sometimes that's all you have, but it can make a difference. I love that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Divya, for that. I'll share a few resources. So one, just in terms of managing or working on your own mental health, I'm a huge fan of journaling and just writing down your thoughts and your feelings on your phone, like in your, little notepad on the phone. And that's it, I think. And learning like just the labeling of your emotions, I think can just go such a long way. It's getting it out of your head and down on paper. I also write a lot about mental health and emotional well-being. So I'll plug my own website, workbigger.co. There's a ton of resources in there on managing anxiety and mindset and all of that stuff. And I share a lot on LinkedIn as well. And then I have a free class. We talked about active listening here. So Stephanie, if it would be helpful, I'm happy to share a link to it's up on YouTube. It's a class all about communication and building healthier relationships in the workplace. I think that's super connected to mental health, how we engage with other people. So I'm happy to share that as well. It's a great class, and I recommend sitting in on that.
Amazing. Thank you. That's awesome.
Yes, please do. Please do share that. I'll recommend one, by that I consider sort of, it goes back to what we were talking about around building our language, our vocabulary, which is Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart. It's organized into sections of, places we go when whatever things go wrong, and then it like lists, I think there's 87 emotions. She's a social researcher, and so she's done the research, and it's not like a front to back read. It's like a pick it up when you're going through something and be like, oh, like what is this? Because I think there was a study that showed that most people can name 3 emotions, like happy, sad, mad. And how sad is that we can name 3? So that's like my, sort of like emotional intelligence Bible I go to all the time. And then also I would say the same thing. So on the sort of self-promotion side, last year I went through a time of just intense physical and mental burnout. I I didn't follow those early warning signs that I should have. And I waited until literally I was paralyzed one day, could not get out of bed. The day after I got after that situation, I got on a plane and I just like journal. I love what you're saying, journaling. I created what is now become my life's work. So I've created, it's called the Bounce Back Blueprint, and I'm working at individual, team, and organizational levels and equipping people with a new way to build resilience, because resilience to me and mental health are like synonymous. They're like all related. And I think part of why we're getting mental health wrong is because we're programmed, especially women, that when something's not right, we just skim over it, bounce back, get back on the horse as quickly as possible. And I am just like really, really passionate about sort of going against the toxic resilience that we're in and building some new tools. So I have all that on my website. I have a really exciting partnership with a company called Film Forward, where we bring it to organizations using the power of storytelling through short film and help to teach people the model along the way. So, and chances like this. So it's been so fun to be here today. So thank you for having me.
This has been so amazing. Thank you all so much. What an amazing conversation. I appreciate all of your insights and your vulnerability. Always tough topics we cover, but this has been super helpful. And I have notes. Like Jen said, I always leave with so many notes and so many recommendations. Everyone who listened in, thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you next month for our panel discussion as well. Until next time, be well.